Greetings all, Bruno Luce here with GLB Productions. Thanks for joining us for this video. Today I'm going to be reviewing a pair of earphones from German company Vivanco. The earphones in question are called their handcrafted earphones, and they were provided for this review by local company Soundsmith Solutions, so thanks very much to them. A little bit about Vivanco first of all. You don't hear the name Vivanco mentioned very much in pro audio circles, and that's because they are best known, at least in Singapore, as a structured cabling company. In other words, they do things like microphone cable, Cat5, Cat6 cable, that sort of thing that you would use for installations in buildings. Going to their website, which is vivanco.com, I realized that they also do a whole series of consumer as well as professional audio products, including headphones and earphones. So let's have a look at the product which we have today, and then I'll tell you a little bit about how it sounds. Okay, so let's begin our review of the Vivanco Limited Edition handcrafted earphones. As you can see, the presentation on these is quite excellent. They come in this very nice wooden presentation box or case, and they have this clear window in the front where you can see the earphones there. Sorry about the shine. We'll get that cover off as soon as we can so that you can see them properly. As you can see there, it says on the front, made from instrument grade wood. I don't really know what that means. I don't know what sort of instruments they're referring to. They're not specific about the type of wood that they're made out of. And below there you can see made for iPod, iPhone, iPad, etc. On the back, it gives some product information. Once again, as you can see there, it says these earphones are truly unique. They've been handcrafted from instrument grade wood to deliver the very best acoustic performance. There's some specifications there. You can see it is 18 Hz to 23 kHz. That's the claimed frequency response. And on the other side it says 98 dB. I'm not quite sure what that means. I suspect that it's a sensitivity rating, but they don't tell you 98 dB at 1 watt 1 meter or as 1 milliwatt 1 meter. There's some further information below there, and more information there. The earphones themselves are made in China. Vivanco is a German company, but these are made in China. Okay, so next up, let's open the packaging and see what we have. The box comes with a sort of pull tab at the top, and you remove this. Below that you can see you have the earphones themselves. They fit very nicely into this sort of hard foam insert. You've got the cord there, and you've got a packet here containing some silicone earbuds. They provide 3 pairs, the mediums, which come attached to the earphones themselves, and this contains a small and a large size. Now I'm going to lift this tray out just for now, and I'm going to show you what comes underneath. Now see a cool dude there, but one thing that they give you with these earphones that don't come with all earphones is the fact that the box actually can be reused as a picture frame. And as you can see there, it states, a little bit hard to read, but this packaging has been especially designed to be used as a 6x4 inch photo frame after it completes its task of protecting your new audio editions. And there's some instructions here as to how you can go about that. Basically what you do, obviously now when the packaging is removed, you simply put a photo inside, and then it can be recycled instead of being thrown away. It's a nice thought. I'm not quite sure what sort of wood this is, but it seems fairly solid and not likely to fall apart anytime soon. Okay, so as far as packaging is concerned, these definitely score top marks. They're beautifully packaged, and they would make a great gift for somebody who's into aesthetically pleasing things. Now let's talk about the earphones themselves. As you can see here, they're packaged within this hard foam insert. What's very interesting about these is the fact that you can see the back of the headphones are wooden, all right? And apparently these are all handmade, and no two pairs are alike. In other words, wood naturally is very different from piece to piece, and every single pair of these is unique. Here you can see this is actually a control for iPods, iPhones, iPads. I'll tell you what that does in a second. And below here you have the cable. You have a mini jack, which, as you can see there, is equipped with a tip ring sleeve connector, so you can use this with your iPhone or other smartphone, as well as using it for playback. Now you will notice that there is no carrying case included. The literature on the back of the box said that there is supposed to be a carrying case. I couldn't find one. And you'll also note that there is no adapter from mini jack to TRS or 1/4 inch. Give you a close-up of the cable here. As you can see, this cable is very nice. It has this sort of braided fabric sheath around it, and the connector itself has this rubber strain relief at the bottom. So all appears to be high quality construction, and looks like it should last a good long time. Now let's get the earphones out and give you some close-ups of those. Okay, so here we have the earphones themselves. Just give you a slow pan there. It's one, and here's the other. So you can see there, very aesthetic, very nicely done. The wood grain matches nicely with the silver trim, both next to the earbud as well as at the connector. In case you're wondering, where is the left-right designation? It's actually here on the strain relief. So you can see there, right and left. Should probably put them in the correct position there, so you can see there, left and right. Now the design of these, as you can see here, this is where they split into left and right, and it is a conventional design. It's not a neck chain design as you would get on Sony's. Both of these are the same length, and it's not where the left one is shorter and the right one is longer. I'm not sure why they did that, but presumably this means that they are completely ambidextrous. Now let's take a little look at the actual construction of the earbud itself. As you can see, it appears to be a fairly conventional construction. If I just pull this silicone earpiece off, you can see that it is a single driver. There's a grill there to prevent, among other things, earwax going down and blocking that up. There are no visible ports or vents, and the driver is positioned immediately behind, firing directly into the earbud. So this is very conventional construction, a very traditional construction for earphones. One thing that I should mention at this point is that these earbuds are definitely on the large size. This is supposed to be the medium, and I personally found it more like a large. I have quite big ears, and these were actually a little bit of a tight fit for me. If I show you, they also supply you with this bag which contains the other two. You can see there's the small and the large. The large do look very, very large indeed. I'm not sure whose ears those would be for, but you do have the option. As I showed earlier, the silicone earbuds come on and off easily. It's really simple to switch to a larger or smaller size. Now before we move on to actually talking about how they sound, I thought I'd give you a close-up of the actual controller. This is found on the left, just below the left earbud, and as you can see it has a plus, a minus, and then a center button. Instructions for these are found in the packaging itself, so you can see there, if you're using an iPod or iPad, the center button does various things depending on how many times you press it. If you're using an iPhone, you can actually use these to answer calls. On the back of this, there is a microphone. As you can see there, there's a tiny little hole. And obviously, the plus minus buttons are to adjust volumes. I need to say that the volume adjustment is only for use with a phone. There is no internal volume control. It's just a remote for the volume on the phone itself. So that was a look at the Vivanco Limited Edition handcrafted earphones. As you can see, they're presented extremely well and they appear to be of relatively high quality construction. Now, on to the most important part, how do they sound? It's important to realize that the way we listen to sound is relative and it is subjective. I personally, when it comes to earphones, have used Sony earphones almost exclusively since the early 90s. That is my bias and that's what I'm used to, so it's important to state that at the beginning of this review. In particular, I'm going to be comparing this set of earphones to my Sony MDR-EX310 earphones. They are also a single driver design, but as you can see from the picture, they are a much more unconventional design with the driver oriented at 90 degrees to the actual earbud, and they also have a couple of ports and vents to increase or to fine-tune the response of the earphones themselves. The other thing is that I tend to use two pieces of music when reviewing headphones and earphones. The first is a piece by Marcus Miller from his 2005 Silver Rain album. The piece of music is called Frankenstein, and the second one by Rebecca Pigeon from her 2003 retrospective album is Spanish Harlem. So let's begin with my findings after listening to Frankenstein. Now, Frankenstein, as I've stated in other reviews, I use it because it's an instrumental piece, so there's no vocal to get distracted or hung up on, and it also has a very wide dynamic range and it has a very wide frequency range. You get the lows of Marcus Miller's bass right through to the highs of the horn section, trumpets and saxophones, so on. So I began by listening to the Vivancos. Now, I'd like to begin by saying that the very, very tight fit of the Vivancos is probably something that contributes to the good bass response of these headphones that you will hear me mention time and again in the review. So the Vivancos appear to be a seal design. In other words, there's no porting anywhere within the body of the earphone, unlike the Sonys. And once you have them well seated in your ear canal, everything is sealed. There's nowhere for the sound to escape except directly into your eardrum. So the first thing is that I noticed when listening to Frankenstein is that these the Vivancos had a tremendous amount of bass, but it was not a clear, tight bass. It was sort of a very woolly or pillowy bass. And this is both a good and a bad thing. It depends on what you like. And as I said earlier, the way we listen to sound is very subjective. I found the kick drum, it was almost like I could feel the kick drum vibrating my head. It was a little bit hard to hear the notes that it was playing, but the seal design really felt like my head was being kicked by the kick drum. The snare drum, on the other hand, sounded quite funky. There was no crack, but it had a sort of splat sound to it. A little bit like the snare drum head was very, very worn. Marcus Miller's bass, as you know, on this particular track, he plays slap bass. His bass did not sound very clear. It certainly had a lot of power and it had a lot of kick, low end to it. One thing which I noticed fairly quickly is that the Vivancos, when compared to the Sonys, have very little high treble. In fact, they sound as though they don't have anything over 10K, and they have this overall extremely warm, pillowy sound that is a result of that frequency response. Near the beginning of Frankenstein, there's a horn solo. The horn sounded very smooth, very nice to listen to. There was a sort of mushy sound when the whole band played. In other words, it sounded like the instruments were quite difficult to differentiate from one another compared to the Sonys. The bass, on the other hand, sounded huge, although not well defined. It certainly sounded really big when compared to the Sonys. Halfway through the piece, Marcus Miller plays a bass solo, and it actually sounded really good. It sounded good in a sort of warm and fuzzy way. There was a huge amount of low end and low mid range, but I think towards the end he sort of plays a passage where he does a series of hammer-ons, and it's a very complex passage musically, and this to me sounded quite mushy and messy compared to the same passage that I listened to on the Sonys. I then switched over to the Sonys and I listened to the same track on them. Compared to the Vivancos, the Sony sounded really harsh. Now again, remember that our ears are very subjective and they habituate to a certain way, a certain listening source, and then they can give you a sort of false positive after that. So just take this with a grain of salt. They sounded quite harsh after listening to the Vivancos. The electric guitar, on the other hand, sounded like it had more dimension. I could hear more of the string noise as opposed to on the Vivancos. The trumpet near the beginning sounded very bright, airy, brilliant, and at times a little bit harsh, with a lot of detail compared to the Vivancos. The snare drum definitely sounded better on the Sonys. It had a nice crack to it. It didn't sound like the head was worn out. The saxophone had much more presence. It sounded a lot more real compared to the Vivancos. When it came to the bass solo, the bass sounded really tight with a ripping top end, a lot more like Marcus Miller. Those of you who know Marcus Miller, he uses DR strings, either the high beams or the fat beams, depending on how he feels. And his bass sound has quite a scoop to it. It has a lot of high end and it has a lot of low end. Both the Vivancos as well as the Sonys had their own pluses and minuses when looking at this track. I then moved on to the track by Rebecca Pigeon, Spanish Harlem, from Retrospective. Now, to be fair, I listened to the Sonys first, followed by the Vivancos. Now, this track, as you know, is something of a audiophile standard. It's also one of those that sound engineers like to use to tune their PA systems, and it's something that a lot of people know. It's from Chesky Records, and it's an audiophile quality recording. Now, on the Sonys, I found that you could really hear the scoop. Sony products in general are well known for the fact that they have more bass and more treble with a little bit less mid-range. You could really hear this scoop on this particular track. The vocal was a little bit back in the mix compared to the Vivancos, and the whole thing just sounded a little bit less present in the mid-range. The strings on the Sonys were very sweet sounding. The piano was very lush sounding. The acoustic guitar was also very nice sounding. And when the full band played, it sounded very full and well balanced on the Sonys. I then switched over to the Vivancos. The Vivancos, the upright bass at the beginning sounded huge and really pillowy. It was almost as though I had my head right up out to the F hole on the upright bass. Again, some people might like this, other people might find it to be a little bit too much bass. When the vocal came in, it sounded very, very resonant, almost like the reverb had been turned up. I know that sounds quite interesting, but that was the first impression that I got. Once again, less highs, less high mid-range on the Sonys. The strings, strangely enough, sounded almost the same. I'm not sure why that is. And the piano, which sounded very, very clear on the Sonys, was somewhat indistinct on the Vivancos. When the acoustic guitar started, I found that it was rather difficult to distinguish the acoustic guitar from the upright bass on the track. When the full band played, I found the sound to be not as balanced. The vocal was somewhat more forward when compared to the Sonys, and it tended to dominate the sound of the recording. The strings, they sounded more unified. They sounded sort of like one big instrument rather than separate instruments playing together. Again, this might be a good or a bad thing. And finally, the Vivancos seem to have not as good of a stereo spread. I found that it was easier with the Sonys to place the individual instruments from left to right. I'm not sure why that is. I don't know what strange effect was at work here, but that was just the impression that I got. So that's my review of the Vivanco Limited Edition handcrafted earphones. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you've got questions or comments, or if you have used the product yourself and would like to share your experience, do let me know in the comments section below. Until the next video, this is Bruno Luce for GLB Productions. Take care, I'll see you soon.